Chapter 1 Basic Concepts of Economy. Economics of Development, Concepts and Approaches. The economics of development refers to the problems of economic development of underdeveloped countries. Though the study of economic development has attracted the attention of economists right from Adam Smith down to Marx and Keynes, yet they were mainly interested in the problems which were static in nature and largely related to Western European framework of social and cultural institutions. It is in the 40s of the 20th century, and especially after the Second World War, that economists started devoting their attention towards analyzing the problems of underdeveloped countries and formulating theories and models of development and growth for underdeveloped countries. Their interest in the economics of development has been further stimulated by the wave of political resurgence that swept the Asian and African nations as they threw off their colonial yoke after the Second World War. The desire on the part of the new leaders in these countries to promote rapid economic development, coupled with a realization on the part of developed nations that poverty anywhere is a threat to prosperity everywhere, has aroused further interest in the subject. But the interest of wealthy nations in removing poverty of the underdeveloped countries has not been aroused by any humanitarian motives. The most cogent reason for aiding underdeveloped countries had been the Cold War between Russia and the West before the collapse of the Soviet Union. Each bloc tried to enlist the support and loyalty of underdeveloped countries by promising larger aid than the other bloc. Economic development has also an export value for both the aid giving and the aid receiving countries. In order to avoid stagnation, rich countries need an outlet for the use of their growing capital stock, and poor countries need an accelerating rate of development to increase their export potential in order to avoid deficit in the balance of payments. The study of poverty of nations and methods for removing poverty cannot be based on the experience of rich nations. For in the advanced countries, there has been a tendency to take economic development for granted as something that takes care of itself, and instead to concentrate on the short-term oscillations of the country. Therefore, Myrdal, Myrdal, says that the underdeveloped countries should not accept our inherited economic theory uncritically, but remold it to fit their own problems and interests. Economic development and economic growth. Generally speaking, economic development refers to the problems of underdeveloped countries, and economic growth to those of developed countries. Madison makes a distinction between the two terms when he says, the raising of income levels is generally called economic growth in rich countries, and in poor ones it is called economic development. But this view does not specify the underlying forces which raise the income levels in the two types of economies. Mrs. Hicks points out in this connection that the problems of underdeveloped countries are concerned with the development of unused resources, even though their uses are well known, while those of advanced countries are related to growth, most of the resources being already known and developed to a considerable extent. In fact, the terms development and growth have nothing to do with the type of economies. The distinction between the two relates to the nature and causes of change. Schumpeter, Schumpeter, makes the distinction clearer when he defines development as a discontinuous and spontaneous change in the stationary state, which forever alters and displaces the equilibrium state previously existing. While growth is a gradual and steady change in the long run, which comes about by a gradual increase in the rate of savings and population. This view of Schumpeter has been widely accepted and elaborated by the majority of economists. According to Kindleberger, Kindleberger, economic growth means more output, while economic development implies both more output and, more importantly, changes in the technical and institutional arrangement by which it is produced and distributed. Growth may well involve not only more output derived from greater amounts of inputs, but also greater efficiency, that is, an increase in output per unit of input. Development goes beyond this to imply changes in the composition of output and in the allocation of inputs by sectors. Friedman, Friedman, defines growth as an expansion of the system in one or more dimensions without a change in a structure, and development as an innovative process leading to the structural transformation of the social system. Thus, economic growth is related to a quantitative and sustained increase in the country's per capita output or income, accompanied by an expansion in its labor force, consumption, capital, and volume of trade. On the other hand, economic development is a wider concept than economic growth. It is taken to mean growth plus change. It is related to qualitative changes in economic wants, goods, incentives, institutions, productivity, knowledge, or the upward movement of the entire social system. According to Migdal, it describes the underlying determinants of growth, such as technological and structural changes. In fact, economic development embraces both growth and decline. An economy can grow, but it may not develop because poverty, unemployment, and inequalities may continue to persist due to the absence of technological and structural changes. But it is difficult to imagine development without economic growth. That is, in the absence of an increase in output per capita, particularly when population is growing rapidly. Despite these apparent differences, some economists use these terms synonymously. Arthur Lewis, in his The Theory of Economic Growth, writes that most often we shall refer only to growth, but occasionally, for the sake of variety, to progress or to development. These terms will also be used as synonyms throughout this next chapter. Measurement of economic development. Economic development is measured in 4 ways. 1. Gross National Product, GNP. One of the methods to measure economic development is in terms of an increase in the economy's real national income over a long period of time. But this is not a satisfactory definition due to the following reasons. 1. Real national income refers to the country's total output of final goods and services in real terms rather than in money terms. Thus, Price changes will have to be ruled out while calculating real national income. But this is unrealistic because variations in prices are inevitable. In this measure, the phrase over a long period of time implies a sustained increase in real income. Thus, a short period rise in national income, which occurs during the upswing of the business cycle, does not constitute economic development. 2. This measure fails to take into consideration changes in the growth of population. If a rise in real national income is accompanied by an even faster growth in population, then there will be no economic growth, but instead there will be retardation. 3. The GNP figure also does not reveal the cost to society of environmental pollution, urbanization, industrialization, and population growth. It considers natural resources to be free and treats the earth, open quote, like a business in liquidation, close quote. Further, it tells us nothing about the distribution of income in the economy. The second measure of economic development is GNP per capita. This second measure relates to an increase in per capita real income of the economy over a long period. Economists are one in defining economic development in terms of an increase in per capita real income or output. Meyer, M-E-I-E-R, defines economic development, open quote, as a process whereby real per capita income of a country increases over a long period of time, subject to the stipulations that the number of people below an absolute poverty line does not increase, and that the distribution of income does not become more unequal, close quote. This indicator of economic growth emphasizes that for economic development, the rate of increase in real per capita income should be higher than the growth rate of population. But difficulties still remain even with this measure. 1. An increase in per capita income may not raise the real standards of living of the masses. It is possible that while per capita real income is increasing, per capita consumption might be falling. 2. There is another possibility of the masses remaining poor despite an increase in the real GNP per capita if the increased income goes to the few rich instead of going to the many poor. 3. Such a measure subordinates other questions regarding the structure of the society, the size and the composition of its population, its institutions and culture, the resource patterns and even distribution of output among society's members. 4. The real per capita income estimates fail to adequately measure changes in output due to changes in price level. 5. International comparisons of the real GNP per capita are inaccurate due to exchange rate conversion of different currencies into a common currency, for example US dollars, through use of official exchange rates. These nominal exchange rates do not reflect the relative purchasing power of different currencies. Thus, the comparisons of GNP per capita of different countries are erroneous. 6. The real GNP per capita fails to take into account Problems associated with basic needs like nutrition, health, sanitation, housing, water, and education. The improvement in living standards by providing for basic needs cannot be measured by an increase in GNP per capita. Despite these limitations, the real GNP per capita is the most widely used measure of economic development. Welfare. There is also a tendency to measure economic development from the point of view of economic welfare. Economic development is regarded as a process whereby there is an increase in the consumption of goods and services of individuals. According to Okun, OKUN, and Richardson, economic development is, within quotes, a sustained secular improvement in material well-being, which we may consider to be reflected in an increasing flow of goods and services. Close quote. This indicator is also not free from limitations. The first limitation arises with regard to the weights to be attached to the consumption of goods and services by individuals. Consumption of goods and services depends on the preferences of individuals. It is therefore not correct to have the same weights in preparing the welfare index across different individuals. Second, in measuring economic welfare, caution has to be exercised with regard to the composition of the total output that is giving rise to an increase in per capita consumption and how this output is being valued. The increased total output may in fact be composed of capital goods. It may be at a cost of a reduced output of consumer goods. Third, a real difficulty arises in the valuation of the output. The output may be valued at market prices, whereas economic welfare is measured by an increase in real national output or income. In fact, with a different distribution of income, prices themselves would be different, and both the composition and the value of national output would also be different. Fourth, from the welfare point of view, we must consider not only what is produced, but how it is produced. The expansion of real national output might have raised the real costs, that is, the pain and sacrifice, as well as social costs in the economy. For instance, the increased output might have resulted from long working hours and in the deterioration of the working conditions of the labor force. Fifth, it is not essential that with the increase in national income, the economic welfare has actually also improved. It is possible that with the increase in real national income or per capita income, the rich might have become richer and the poor poorer. Thus, mere increase in economic welfare does not lead to economic development till the distribution of national income is equitable or justifiable. Last, we cannot equate an increase in output with an increase in economic welfare, let alone social welfare, without additional considerations. To specify an optimum rate of development, we must make value judgments regarding income distribution, composition of output, tastes, real cost, and other particular changes that are associated with the overall increase in the real income. 3. Now let's look at social indicators. Dissatisfied with GNP per capita as a measure of economic development, certain economists have tried to measure it in terms of social indicators. Social indicators include inputs such as nutritional standards or number of hospital beds or doctors per head of population, while others may be output corresponding to these inputs, such as improvement in health in terms of infant mortality rates, sickness rates, etc. Social indicators are often referred to as the basic needs for development. Basic needs focus on alleviation of poverty by providing basic human needs to the poor. The direct provision of such basic needs, such as health, education, food, water, sanitation, and housing, affects poverty in a shorter period and with fewer monetary resources than GNP growth, which aims at increasing productivity and incomes of the poor automatically over the longer run. Basic needs leads to a higher level of productivity and income through human development in the form of educated and healthy people. The merit of social indicators is that they are concerned with the ends being human development. Economic development is a means to those ends. Social indicators tell us how different countries prefer to allocate the GNP among alternative users. Some may prefer to spend more on education and less on hospitals. Moreover, they give us an idea about the presence, absence, or deficiencies of certain basic needs. Hicks and Streeton consider 6 social indicators for basic needs. 1. Health. The indicator of health is life expectancy at birth. 2. Education. Its indicator is literacy, signifying primary school education, primary school enrollment as a percentage of population. 4. Food. Calorie supply per head. 4. Water supply. The indicator is infant mortality and percentage of population with access to potable water. 5. Sanitation. The indicator is infant mortality and percentage of population with access to sanitation. And the sixth basic need is housing. Except for calorie supply per head, all other indicators are output indicators. Of these, infant mortality is both the indicator of sanitation and clean drinking water facilities because children are prone to waterborne diseases. It is also related to life expectancy at birth and nutritional deficiencies among infants. Thus, the infant mortality rate measures 4 of the 6 basic needs. Human development indices. Economists have tried to measure social indicators of basic needs by taking 1, 2, or more indicators for constructing composite indices of human development. We study below the Physical Quality of Life Index (PQLI) of Morris and the Human Development Index (HDI) as developed by the United Nations Development Programme (UNDP). Let's first look at Physical Quality of Life Index or PQLI. The Physical Quality of Life Index was the most serious challenge to GNP per capita as the index of development. It was invented by M.D. Morris in 1979. He constructed a composite physical quality of life index, PQLI, relating to 23 developing countries for a comparative study. He combines three component indicators, which are infant mortality, life expectancy at age 1, and basic literacy at age 15, to measure performance in meeting the most basic needs of people. This index represents a wide range of indicators such as health, education, drinking water, nutrition, and sanitation. The PQLI shows improvement in the quality of life when people enjoy the fruits of economic progress with increase in life expectancy, LE, fall in infant mortality rates, IMR, and rise in basic literacy rate, BLR. Each indicator of the three components is placed on a scale of 0 to 100, where 0 represents an absolutely defined worst performance and 100 represents an absolutely defined best performance. The PQLI index is calculated by averaging the three indicators, giving equal weight to each, and the index is also scaled from 0 to 100. If the indicators like expectancy and basic literacy rate are positive, the best performance is shown as the maximum and the worst as the minimum. Infant mortality rate being a negative indicator, the best indicator is shown as a minimum and the worst is shown as a maximum. To find out the achievement level of the positive variable, its minimum value is deducted from its actual value and the balance is divided by the difference, that is a range between the maximum value and the minimum value. Therefore, the achievement level is calculated as actual value minus the minimum value, and this remainder is divided by the maximum value minus the minimum value. To find out the achievement for a negative indicator, its actual value is deducted from its maximum value and the balance is divided by the difference, that is the range between the maximum and the minimum value. So the achievement level for a negative indicator is calculated as maximum value minus the actual value divided by the maximum value minus the minimum value. For life expectancy and infant mortality rate, there is no natural maximum and minimum value, but there is a need to select the right values. According to Morris, each of the three indicators measures results and not inputs such as income. Each is sensitive to distribution effects. It means that an improvement in these indicators signifies an improvement in the proportion of people benefiting from them. But none of the indicators depend on any particular level of development. Each indicator lends itself to international comparison. Taking Gabon's Gabon's infant mortality rate of 229 per thousand live births as the worst rate in 1950, Morris sets it at 0. At the upper end, the best achievement is set to 9 per 1,000 births for the year 2000. Again, taking Vietnam's life expectancy at age 1 as 38 years in 1950, Morris sets it to 0 of the life expectancy index. The upper limit is set at 77 years for men and women combined for the year 2000. Lastly, the basic literacy rate at 15 years is taken as the literacy index. Now let's look at a table which lists the maximum and minimum values of the component indicators. First, let's look at infant mortality rate. The maximum is 229, the minimum is 9, and the range is 220. Moving on to life expectancy at age 1. The maximum is 77 and the minimum is 38, the difference being 39. Moving on to basic literacy rate. The maximum is 180 and the minimum is 0. The minimum is 100 and the difference, the range is 100. The coefficient of correlation between life expectancy at age 1 and infant mortality is of a high degree, that is, it is highly correlated and it is negative. Similarly is the correlation between literacy and infant mortality rate. That is, with higher literacy, the infant mortality rates decline. The coefficient between literacy and life expectancy shows a high degree of positive correlation. That is, with higher literacy, the life expectancy also increases. Morris regards life expectancy at age 1 and infant mortality as very good indicators of the physical quality of life. So are literacy and life expectancy as a whole. In fact, the literacy indicator reflects the potential for development. On this basis, Morris presents the following correlation. With n equals 150, life expectancy at age 1 is minus 9.1.9 and life expectancy shows a plus minus. Literacy shows 0.919 under infant mortality and 0.897. These are actually the correlation tables. So to repeat the tables for greater clarity, with an n population size, a sample size of 150, the correlation between infant mortality and life expectancy is minus 9.19. The correlation between infant mortality and literacy is minus 9.19. The correlation between life expectancy and literacy is plus 0.897. Now let's look at the relationship between PQLI performance and GNP per capita growth rate. We look at two underdeveloped countries, which is India and Sri Lanka, and two developed countries, which is Italy and the USA, for a period between 1950, 1960 and 1970. We look at the PQLIs in each of these years, and then we also look at the average annual GNP per capita growth rate. Starting with India, in 1950 the PQLI was 14, in 1960 it was 30, and 1970 it was 40. And the annual GNP per capita growth rate from 1950 to 1970 was 1.8. This is the average annual GNP per capita growth rate. Now let's look at Sri Lanka. For Sri Lanka, the PQLI in 1950 was 65, in 1960 it was 75, and 1970 it stood at 80. The average annual GNP per capita growth rate for this period from 1950 to 1970 was 1.9. For Italy, the PQLI in 1950 was 80, PQLI in 1960 was 87, and in 1970 it was 92. The average annual GNP per capita growth rate over this period from 1950 to 1970 was 5. Moving on to the second developed country, which is the USA, the PQLI in 1950 was 89, in 1960 it was 91, in 1970 it was 93. The average annual GNP per capita growth rate from 1950 to 1970 was 2.4. The source of this information is M.D. Morris and M.B.M.C. Allen, Measuring the Conditions of India's Poor, 1982. This table reveals that India, which Morris calls a basket case within quotes, exhibited slow but not insignificant improvement in its PQLI from 14 to 40 over a period of 2 decades from 1950 to 1970, despite its low growth in average GNP per capita of just 1.8. On the other hand, Sri Lanka's PQLI was much higher than India's during this period, although its average GNP per capita was almost the same. Of the two developed countries, both Italy and the USA had very high PQLI. But Italy's average GNP per capita was more than double that of the USA. In this connection, Morris observes that there is no automatic link between GNP per capita growth and PQLI growth. In fact, the presence or absence of social relations, nutritional status, public health, education, and family environment determines a society's PQLI. Further, it takes considerable time to build up institutional arrangements that can generate and sustain a high PQLI. Limitations of the PQLI index. The PQLI tries to measure the quality of life directly rather than indirectly, but it has its limitations. 1. Morris admits that PQLI is a limited measure of basic needs. 2. It supplements but does not supplant or replace the GNP. It fails to dislodge GNP from its lofty perch. 3. It does not explain the changing structure of economic and social organization. It therefore does not measure economic development. 4. Similarly, it does not measure total welfare. And 5. Morris has been criticized for using equal weights for the three variables of his PQLI, which undermine the value of the index in a comparative analysis of different countries. According to Meyer, MEIER, non-income factors captured by the PQLI are important, but so are income and consumption statistics and distribution-sensitive methods of aggregation that are ignored by it. Conclusion: despite these limitations, the PQLI can be used to identify particular regions of underdevelopment and groups of society suffering from the neglect or failure of social policy. It points towards that indicator where immediate action is required. The state can take up such policies which increase the PQLI rapidly along with economic growth. Construction of PQLI. On the basis of the values of the component indicators provided previously, we can construct PQLI in the following manner. Infant mortality rate index is calculated as 229 minus actual IMR divided by 220. Life expectancy index is calculated as actual life expectancy minus 38 divided by 39. And the basic literacy index is calculated as actual literacy level minus 0. We calculate the PQLI for India on the basis of 2001 census data for these variables. As per this data, the IMR was equal to 67, life expectancy index was 65, and the basic literacy index was 65%. For 2001, the figures are as follows. IMRI, that is the infant mortality rate index, uses the figure 67 as follows. The calculation is 229 minus 67 divided by 220, and the value is 0.74. Life expectancy index is 65 minus 38 divided by 39, and that equals 0.69. And the basic literacy index is 65 minus 0 divided by 100, which equals 0.65. The PQLI is a sum of IMRI plus LEI plus BLI divided by 100, and this figure equals 0.74 plus 0.69 plus 0.65 divided by 100, and this value is equal to 0.69. Thus, the physical quality of life index for India was 0.69. Human Development Index, or HDI. Lord Meghnad Desai and Nobel laureate Amartya Sen invented the Human Development Index, and the UNDP, that is the United Nations Development Programme, incorporated it into its first Human Development Report in 1990. Since then, the UNDP has been presenting the measurement of human development in terms of in its annual report. The HDI is a composite index of three social indicators: life expectancy, adult literacy, and years of schooling. It also takes into account real GDP per capita. Thus, the HDI is a composite index of achievement in three fundamental dimensions. 1. Living a long and healthy life. 2. Being educated. And 3. Having a decent standard of living. The HDI value of a country is calculated by taking three indicators. 1. Longevity as measured by life expectancy at birth. 2. Educational attainment as measured by a combination of adult literacy, which has 2/3 weight, and combined primary, secondary, and tertiary enrollment ratio, which has 1/3 weight. And the third indicator is a decent standard of living as measured by real GDP per capita based on purchasing power parity in terms of dollar. Purchasing power parity in terms of dollar is summarized as PPP dollar. Before the HDI is calculated, an index is calculated for each of these three dimensions: life expectancy index, education index, and GDP index. To calculate these indices, minimum and maximum values or goalposts are chosen for each indicator. Goalposts for calculating the HDI. For the indicator life expectancy at birth in years, the maximum value is 85 years and the minimum value is 25 years. For adult literacy rate percentage, the maximum value is 100 and the minimum value is 0. The combined gross enrollment ratio has a maximum value of 100 and a minimum value of 0. For GDP per capita, that is PPP in US dollars, the maximum value is 40,000 and the minimum value is 100. Performance in each dimension is expressed as a value between 0 and 1 by applying the following formula. Dimension index equals actual value minus minimum value divided by maximum value minus minimum value. The HDI is then calculated as a simple average of the three-dimension indices. 3. GDP index. The GDP per capita, PPP in US dollars, of this country is $8,840, in which case the GDP index would be log of 8,840 minus log of 100 divided by log of 40,000 minus log of 100. This results in a value of 0.748. Coming to Human Development Index, the HDI is a simple average of the Life Expectancy Index, Education Index, and the Adjusted GDP per capita index. It is derived by dividing the sum of these three indices by 3. So HDI equals 1/3 of 0.884 plus 1/3 of 0.813 plus 1/3 of 0.784, which works out to 0.815. So with these sample data, This country with the HDI of 0.815 comes under the category of high human development. Now let's look at some new aspects of development and growth of economy in the present scenario. Basic human needs. Dissatisfied with growth, employment, and income distribution approaches of development, economic thinkers turn towards the basic human needs strategy for promoting human well-being, especially that of the poor. The World Bank's first mission to an LDC, Colombia, in 1950, had stated its objectives in terms of meeting basic human needs. 2. Stabilization and structural adjustment. In the early 1980s, the decline in the growth rate of developed countries, the rise in oil prices, the debt crisis in developing countries, and the worsening of their terms of trade pushed the basic needs strategy to the background. Many countries embarked on programs of stabilization and structural adjustments. Initially, stabilization measures supported by the IMF and World Bank aimed at reducing inflation, both budgetary and trade deficits, cutting public spending, reducing wages, and raising interest rates. But these measures often led to recession in some countries. Moreover, these were short-term measures. Goaded by the World Bank and IMF, many developing countries switched to long-term structural adjustment program. It is a domestically designed program of reforms by following the policies of liberalization, adjustment, and privatization. These involve reducing the role of the state, removing subsidies, liberalizing prices, and opening economies to flows of international trade and finance. These often include measures to reduce the fiscal deficit. 3. Human capabilities. During this period of liberalization, adjustment, and privatization, Professor Amartya Sen emphasized the concept of promoting human capabilities. According to him, at the core of human well-being is freedom of choice by enhancing people's capabilities for attaining higher standards of health, of knowledge, self-respect, and the ability to participate actively in community life. The standard of living of a society should not be judged by GNP per capita and the supply of particular goods, but by people's capabilities, that is, what a person can or cannot do, can or cannot be. It is the set of entitlements, the set of alternative commodity bundles that a person can command in a society that generate these entitlements. The relevant capabilities are being free from starvation, from hunger, from undernourishment, participation in communal life, being adequately sheltered, and so on. The expansion of these capabilities implies freedom of choices, political, social, economic, and cultural freedom. 4. Human development. The UNDP incorporated Sen's view in its first Human Development Report in 1990. According to it, human development goes far beyond income and growth to cover all human capabilities, the needs, aspirations, and choice of the people. It defines human development as a process of enlarging people's choices that are created by expanding human capabilities. Income is one of the choices, but is not the only choice. Rise in income is not the same thing as an increase in human capabilities. Besides higher income, poor people put a high value on adequate nutrition, access to safe drinking water, better medical facilities, better schooling for their children, affordable transport, adequate shelter, secure livelihood, and productive and satisfying jobs. 5. Sustainable development. In 1987, the World Commission on Environment and Development, called the Brundtland Commission, Brundtland Commission, used a new concept of sustainable development. It defined the term sustainable development as meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the needs of the future generation. Economic development must be sustainable, which means that it should keep going. The World Development Report 1999 to 2000 emphasizes the creation of sustainable improvements in the quality of life for all people as a principal goal of development policy. According to it, sustainable development has many objectives. Besides increasing economic growth and meeting basic needs, the aim of lifting living standards includes a number of more specific goals, which are, within quotes, bettering people's health and educational opportunities, giving chance to everyone to participate in public life, helping to ensure a clean environment, promoting intergenerational equity, and many more. Thus, meeting the needs of people in the present generation is essential in order to sustain the needs of future generations. Now let's look at the top 20 countries for HDI. The HDI rank of 1 goes to Norway, 2 goes to Australia, 3 goes to Netherlands, 4 goes to the United States, 5 goes to New Zealand, 6 to Canada, 7 to Ireland, 8 to Liechtenstein, Liechtenstein, 9 to Germany, 10 to Sweden, 11 to Switzerland, 12 to Japan, 13 to Hong Kong, 14 to Iceland, 15 to Korea, 16 to Denmark, 17 to Israel, 18 to Belgium, 19 to Austria, and 20 to France. India is on the 134th number, when it comes to HDI ranking. The report said that India's Human Development Index HDI for 2011 was 0.547, positioning the country in the medium human development category. Pakistan was ranked at 145, that is 0.504, and Bangladesh at 146 at 0.5 respectively in terms of HDI. On comparing between 1980 and 2011, India's HDI value has increased from 0.344 to 0.547, an increase of 59%, or an average annual increase of about 1.5%. However, the report pointed out that the country's HDI of 0.547 was below the average of 0.630 for countries in the medium human development group and below the average of 0.548 for countries in South Asia. Now let's look at the top 20 countries for the GII rank and value. Sweden has the first rank in the GII rank and with a GII value of 0.049. Netherlands is 2 with a GII value of 0.052. Denmark is 3 with a GII value of 0.06. Switzerland is 4, GII value is 0.067. Finland is 5 with GII value of 0.075. Norway is 6 with GII value of 0.075. Germany is 7 with a GII value of 0.085. Singapore 8, GII value of 0.086. Iceland 9, GII value of 0.099. France is 10, GII value of 0.106. Korea 11, GII value of 0.111. Belgium is 12 with GII value of 0.114. Spain 13, GII value of 0.117. Japan 14 with GII value of 0.123. Italy 15 with GII value of 0.124. Austria 16 with a GII value of 0.131. And Czech Republic, CZECH Republic 17 with GII value of 0.136. Australia 18 with GII value of 0.136. Portugal 19 with GII value of 0.140. And Canada is 20 with GII value of 0.140. India's ranking on GII is 129 with a value of 0.617. GII stands for the Gender Inequality Index. According to the Human Development Report in 2011, India ranked 129 out of 146 countries on the Gender Inequality Index, below Bangladesh and Pakistan, which are ranked at 112 and 115 respectively. In fact, Afghanistan is the only country ranked below India in the South Asian region on the Gender Inequality Index. Amongst the BRICS nations, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, India has the highest inequalities in human development. Let's now look at the Hunger Index. We look at the top 20 countries for the Hunger Index. So here, Gabon is a country with GHI rank 1 and GHI score of 5.2. Mauritius is a second rank with a GHI score of 5.4. Paraguay has a GHI rank of 3 and GHI score of 5.5. China is 4 with a GHI score of 5.5. El Salvador is 5 with a GHI score of 5.5. Kyrgyz Republic is 6 with a GHI score of 5.5. Trinidad and Tobago has a GHI rank of 7 with a GHI score of 5.6. Colombia has a rank of 8 with a GHI score of 5.7. Morocco is 9 with a GHI score of 5.9. Peru is 10 with a GHI rank of 5.9. Turkmenistan is 11 with a GHI score of 6.2. Uzbekistan is 12 with a GHI score of 6.3. South Africa is 13 with a GHI score of 6.4. Panama is 14 with a GHI score of 7. Guyana is 15 with a GHI score of 7.1. Ecuador is 16 with a GHI score of 7.9. Honduras is 17 with a GHI score of 7.9. Suriname is 18 with a GHI score of 8. Thailand is 19 with a GHI score of 8.1. These are the countries these are the developing countries which have been ranked on the hunger index. India is placed at the 67th position in GHI with a score of 23.7. Please contrast this with China's rank of 4 with a GHI score of 5.5. India has been ranked 67, way below neighboring countries like China and Pakistan, and in a new global hunger index by the International Food Policy Research Institute. Among other neighboring countries, Sri Lanka was at the 39th position and Nepal ranked 56 by index. Bangladesh was at 68th position. India is being among the countries with the least improvement in the last 10 years. It has, however, moved from having an extremely alarming food security situation to alarming. China, Brazil, and India are among the countries that have more than halved their GHI scores over the last decade. Multidimensional Poverty Index. The Multidimensional Poverty Index, or MPI for short, is an international measure of acute poverty covering 109 developing countries. The MPI complements income-based poverty measures by reflecting the multiple deprivations that people face at the same time. The MPI identifies deprivations across health, education, and living standards and shows the number of people who are multidimensionally poor and the deprivations they face at the household level. It uses 10 indicators across the 3 dimensions of health, education, and living standards. The indicators for health are nutrition and child mortality. The indicators for education are years of schooling and school attendance. And the indicators for living standards are cooking food, sanitation, water, electricity, and floor assets. The second MPI index, which featured in the United Nations Development Programme 2011 Human Development Report and covered 109 developing countries, was launched on 2nd December 2011. In December, further analysis was released, which shows MPI poverty at the subnational level for 66 countries and tracks the changes to MPI poverty over time in 10 countries. What's new for 2011? In 2011, The MPI has been calculated for 5 new countries and updated for 20 countries. The MPI has been calculated for subnational regions across 66 countries. Changes of MPI over time have been analyzed for 10 countries and their regions. The MPI is robust to a range of possible weights and poverty cutoffs. Key findings for 2011. Most poor people live in middle-income countries. Over twice as many poor people live in middle-income countries as in low-income countries. The 38 countries of sub-Saharan Africa together have the highest MPI poverty rates of any world region, yet the poorest 26 regions of South Asia have a higher combined MPI and more MPI poor people than sub-Saharan Africa. Income classifications hide wide disparities in MPI poverty. In low-income countries, the percentage of poor people ranges from 5% in Kyrgyzstan, KYRGYZSTAN, to 92% in Nigeria. In middle-income countries, it ranges from 0% in Belarus to 77% in Angola. Multidimensional poverty within countries varies greatly. Nepal is poorer according to MPI than Cambodia, but Cambodia's poorest region is poorer than the poorest region of Nepal. Poverty reduction over time varies by dimension. Bangladesh reduced poverty across all dimensions. Kenya reduces MPI mainly through improvements in living standards, and Bolivia made great strides in improving school attendance and sanitation, but less progress in decreasing undernutrition. Inclusive development. Defining inclusive growth. Rapid and sustained poverty reduction requires inclusive growth that allows people to contribute to and benefit from economic growth. 1. Rapid pace of growth is unquestionably necessary for substantial poverty reduction, but for this growth to be sustainable in the long run, it should be broad-based across sectors. And 2, inclusive of the large part of the country's labor force. This definition of inclusive growth implies a direct link between the macro and micro determinants of growth. The micro dimension captures the importance of structural transformation for economic diversification and competition, including creative destruction of jobs and firms. Inclusive growth refers both to the pace and the pattern of growth, which are considered interlinked and therefore in need to be addressed together. The idea that both the pace and the pattern of growth are critical for achieving a high sustainable growth record as well as poverty reduction is consistent with the findings of the Growth Report, Strategies for Sustained Growth and Inclusive Development, generated by the Commission on Growth and Development 2008. The Commission notes that inclusiveness, a concept that encompasses equity, equality of opportunity, and protection in market and employment transitions, is an essential ingredient of any successful growth strategy. Here we emphasize the idea of equality of opportunity in terms of access to markets, resources, and unbiased regulatory environment for business and individuals. The Commission on Growth and Development 2008 considers systematic inequality of opportunity as toxic, as it will derail the growth process through political channels or conflict. The inclusive growth approach takes a longer term perspective as the focus is on productive employment rather than on direct income redistribution as a means of increasing incomes for excluded groups. In the short run, governments could use income distribution schemes to attenuate negative impacts on the poor of policies intended to jumpstart growth. But transfer schemes cannot be an answer in the long run and can be problematic also even in the short run. In poor countries, such schemes can impose significant burdens on already stretched budgets, and it is theoretically impossible to reduce poverty through redistribution in countries where the average income is already very low. According to a recent OECD study, even in developed countries, redistribution schemes cannot be the only response to rising poverty rates in certain segments of their population. The inclusive growth definition is in line with the absolute definition of pro-poor growth, but not with a relative definition. Under the absolute definition, growth is considered to be pro-poor as long as poor people benefit in absolute terms, as reflected in some agreed measure of poverty. In contrast, in the relative definition, growth is pro-poor if and only if the incomes of poor people grow faster than those of the population as a whole. That is, inequality declines. However, while absolute pro-poor growth can be the result of direct redistribution schemes, for growth to be inclusive, productivity must be improved and new employment opportunities created. In short, inclusive growth is about raising the pace of growth and enlarging the size of the economy while leveling the playing field for investment and increasing productive employment opportunities. By focusing on inequality, the relative definition could lead to suboptimal outcomes for both poor and non-poor households. For example, a society attempting to achieve pro-poor growth under the relative definition would favor an outcome characterized by an average income growth of 2%, whereas the income of the poor households grew by 3%, over an outcome where average growth was 6%, but the incomes of the poor grew by only 4%. While the distributional patterns of growth favors poor households in the first scenario, both poor and non-poor households are better off in the second scenario. There is broad recognition that when poverty reduction is the objective, then the absolute definition of pro-poor growth is the most relevant. DFID 2004. Using the absolute definition, the aim is to increase the rate of growth to achieve the greatest pace of poverty reduction. Inclusive growth focuses on ex-ante analysis of sources and constraints to sustained high growth, and not only on one group, the poor. The analysis focuses on ways to raise the pace of growth by utilizing more fully parts of the labor force trapped in low productivity activities or completely excluded from the growth process. This is in contrast to the pro-poor growth literature, which has traditionally focused on measuring the impact of growth on poverty reduction by tracking various poverty measures. Chapter 2: Characteristics of an Underdeveloped Economy. The term underdeveloped has been used in a variety of ways. Undeveloped and underdeveloped countries are often used as synonyms, but these two terms are easily distinguishable. An undeveloped country is one which has no prospects of development, whereas an underdeveloped country is one which has potential for development. The Antarctic, Arctic, and parts of the Sahara may be termed as undeveloped, while India, Pakistan, Uganda, Colombia, Panama, etc. may be called underdeveloped. Poor and backward are also used as synonyms for underdeveloped. Characteristics of an underdeveloped economy. In order to examine the problems of an underdeveloped country, it is useful to have in mind a general sketch of the economy of such a country. Though it is difficult to locate a representative underdeveloped country on the world map, yet it is possible to focus attention on some of its characteristics. 1. General poverty. It is not relative poverty but absolute poverty that is more important in assessing poverty in economies. Absolute poverty is measured not only by low income but also by malnutrition, poor health, clothing, shelter, and lack of education. Thus, absolute poverty is reflected in low living standards of the people. In such countries, food is the major item of consumption and constitutes about 80% of the income which is spent on it, as compared with 20% in advanced countries. People mostly take cereals and other starches to the total absence of nutritional foods such as meat, eggs, fish, and dairy products. In many low-income countries, about 70% of the primary school-age children go to school. At the secondary level, enrollments are lower than 20% in these countries, while enrollment in higher education hardly comes up to 3%. Moreover, the type of education being imparted to the majority of the school and college-going children is ill-suited to the development needs of such countries. Thus, the vast majority of the people in less developed countries are ill-fed, ill-clothed, ill-housed, and ill-educated. Poverty is therefore the basic malady of an underdeveloped country, which is involved in the misery go-round. Professor Cairncross is justified in saying that the underdeveloped countries are the slums of the world economy. 2. Agriculture, the main occupation. In underdeveloped countries, 2/3 or more of the population live in rural areas, and their main occupation is agriculture. There are 4 times as many people occupied in agriculture in some underdeveloped countries as there are in advanced countries. In low-income countries like China, Kenya, Myanmar, and Vietnam, more than 71% of the population is engaged in agriculture, while the percentages for the United States, Canada, and West Germany are 3, 3, and 4 respectively. This heavy concentration in agriculture is a symptom of poverty. Agriculture as a main occupation is mostly unproductive. It is carried on in an old fashion with obsolete and outdated methods of production. The average land holdings are as low as 1 to 3 hectares, which usually support 10 to 15 people per hectare. As a result, the yield from land is precariously low, and the peasants continue to live at a bare subsistence level. Such countries mainly specialize in the production of raw materials and foodstuffs, yet some also specialize in agricultural primary production, that is, minerals. Dualistic economy. Almost all underdeveloped countries have a dualistic economy. One is a market economy, the other is the subsistence economy. One is in and near the towns, the other is in the rural areas. One is developed, the other is less developed. Centered in the towns, the market economy is ultra modern with all the amenities of life, that is, the radio, the car, the bus, the train, the telephone, the theaters, the palatial buildings, the schools, and the colleges. Here too, government offices, business houses, banks, and a few factories are visible. The subsistence economy is backward and is mainly agriculture oriented. Dualism is also characterized by the existence of an advanced industrial system and an indigenous backward agricultural system. The industrial sector uses capital intensive techniques and produces a variety of capital goods and durable consumer goods. The rural sector is engaged in producing agricultural commodities with traditional techniques. There is also financial dualism consisting of the unorganized money market, charging very high interest rates on loans, and the organized money market with very low interest rates and abundant credit facilities. 4. Underdeveloped natural resources. The natural resources of an underdeveloped country are underdeveloped in the sense they are either unutilized or underutilized or misutilized. A country may be deficient in natural resources, but it cannot be so in the absolute sense. Although a country may be poor in resources, it is just possible that in the future it may become rich in resources as a result of discovery of presently unknown resources or because new uses may be found for the known resources. Generally speaking, they are not deficient in land, mineral, water, forest, or power resources. Africa possesses considerable resources of copper, tin, bauxite, and gold. Asia is rich in petroleum, iron, bauxite, manganese, mica, and tin, and Latin America's reserves of petroleum, iron, zinc, and copper are immense. The forest wealth of Africa and South America still remains unpenetrated and unexplored. Thus, underdeveloped countries do possess resources, but they remain unutilized, underutilized, or misutilized due to various constraints such as their inaccessibility, lack of technical knowledge, non-availability, or capital, and the small extent of the market. 5. Demographic features. Underdeveloped countries differ greatly among themselves in demographic position and trends. Diversity exists in the size, density, age structure, and the rate of growth of population. But there appears to be one common feature, which is a rapidly increasing population, which adds a substantial number to the total population every year. With their low per capita incomes and low rates of capital formation, it becomes difficult for such countries to support this additional number. When capital increases due to improved technology and capital formation, it is just swallowed up by the increased population. As a result, there is no marked improvement in the living standards of the masses. Warning about the increase in numbers, Kingsley Side writes, "The womb is slower than the bomb, but it may prove to be just as deadly. Suffocation rather than incineration may mark the end of the human story." Almost all the underdeveloped countries possess high population growth potential, characterized by high birth rate but declining death rate. 6. Unemployment and disguised unemployment. In underdeveloped countries, there is vast open unemployment and disguised unemployment. The unemployment is spreading with urbanization and the spread of education. But the industrial sector has failed to expand along with the growth of the labor force, thereby increasing urban unemployment. Then there are the educated unemployed who fail to get jobs due to structural rigidities and the lack of manpower planning. But underemployment of disguised or concealed unemployment is a notable feature of underdeveloped countries. Such unemployment is not voluntary but involuntary. People are prepared to work, but they are unable to find work throughout the year due to lack of complementary factors. 7. Economic backwardness. In underdeveloped countries, particular manifestations of economic backwardness are low labor efficiency, factor immobility, limited specialization in occupation and trade, economic ignorance, values and social structures that minimize the incentives for economic change. The basic cause of backwardness is to be found in low labor productivity as compared with developed countries. This low labor efficiency results from general poverty, which is reflected in low nutrition standards, poor health, illiteracy, and lack of training. There is also occupational immobility of labor caused by the joint family system and the caste system. Certain cultural and psychological factors are more dominant than wage rates in determining the supply of labor. In short, the cultural value system within many poor countries is not favorable to economic achievement, and thus the people remain economically backward. 8. Lack of enterprise and initiative. Another characteristic feature of underdeveloped countries is a lack of entrepreneurial ability. Entrepreneurship is inhibited by the social system, which denies opportunities for creative faculties. The force of custom, the rigidity of status, and the distrust of new ideas and the exercise of intellectual curiosity all combine to create an atmosphere inimical to experiment and innovation. The small size of the market, lack of capital, absence of private property, absence of freedom of contract and of law and order hamper enterprise and initiative. Further, entrepreneurship is hindered by technological backwardness in underdeveloped countries. This reduces output per person, and the products are also of substandard quality. Such countries do not possess the necessary technical know-how and capital to evolve their own techniques, which may be superior in terms of increasing the output and absorbing the labor. More often than not, they have to depend on imported capital-intensive techniques, which are not suitable for their environment. 10. 9. Insufficient capital equipment. Insufficiency of capital equipment is another general characteristic of such countries. Underdeveloped countries are characterized as capital poor or low saving and low investing economies. There is not only an extremely small capital stock, but the current rate of capital formation is also very low. In most underdeveloped countries, gross investment is only 5 to 6% of GNP, whereas in advanced countries it is about 15 to 20%. Such low rates of the growth of capital are hardly enough to cater to a rapidly growing population of 2 to 2.5% per annum, let alone being enough to invest in new capital projects. In fact, these countries find it difficult to cover even depreciation of capital and replacement of the existing capital equipment. The root cause of this capital deficiency is the problem of undersaving, or more precisely, that of underinvestment in productive investments capable of increasing the rate of economic growth. The per capita income being very low, people on the bare edge of subsistence cannot save much, thereby leaving very little for further investment. Thus, such countries suffer from chronic capital deficiency, and the factors responsible for this are not only economic but also social political in nature. 10. Technological backwardness. Underdeveloped countries are technologically backward. This is reflected firstly in high average cost of production despite such low money wages. Secondly, in low productivity of labor and capital. Thirdly, in the predominance of unskilled and untrained workers. And lastly, in the large amounts of capital equipment required to produce a national output. Deficiency of capital hinders the process of scrapping off the old techniques and the installation of modern techniques. Illiteracy and the absence of a skilled workforce are the other major hurdles in the spread of techniques in the backward economy. It may be pointed out that technological backwardness is not only the cause of economic backwardness, it is also the result of it. 11. Foreign trade orientation. Underdeveloped economies are generally foreign trade oriented. This orientation is reflected in exports of primary products and imports of consumer goods and machinery. The percentage share of fuels, minerals, metals, and other primary products in the exports of less developed countries is about 80%, as revealed by recent World Bank data. This high dependence on exports of primary products leads to serious repercussions in their economies. Firstly, the economy concentrates mainly on the production of primary exports to the comparative neglect of other sectors of the economy. Secondly, the economy becomes particularly susceptible to fluctuations in the international prices of export commodities. A depression abroad brings down their demand and price. As a result, the entire economy is adversely affected. Lastly, too much dependence on few export commodities to the utter neglect of other consumption goods has made these economies highly dependent on imports. Imports generally consist of fuel, manufactured articles such as commodities, machinery, and transport equipment, and even food. Coupled with these is the operation of the demonstration effect, which tends to raise the propensity to import still further. Obstacles to economic development, the vicious circle of poverty. There are circular relationships known as the vicious circle of poverty that tends to perpetuate the low level of development in these economies. Nurks explains the idea in these words. It implies a circular constellation of forces tending to act and react upon one another in such a way so as to keep a poor country in a state of poverty. For example, a poor man may not have enough to eat. Being underfed, his health may be weak. Being physically weak, his working capacity is low, which means that he is poor, which in turn means that he will not have enough to eat, and so on. A situation of this sort, relating to a country as a whole, can be summed up in the trite proposition: a country is poor because it is poor. Economic and non-economic factors of economic growth. The process of economic growth is determined by two factors: economic and non-economic. Economic growth is dependent upon its natural resources, human resources, capital, enterprise, technology, etc. All these are economic factors. But economic growth is not possible so long as the social institutions, political conditions, and moral values in a nation do not encourage development. These are the non-economic factors. To summarize, the economic factors are its natural resources, the capital accumulations, the technological progress, division of labor and scale of production, and structural changes. The non-economic factors are the social factors, human factors, political factors, and administrative factors. Chapter 4: Poverty in India. The concept of poverty. To understand the problem of poverty better, we may distinguish between absolute poverty and relative poverty. Absolute poverty of a person means that his income or consumption expenditure is so meager that he lives below the minimum subsistence level. Because of his absolute poverty condition, he is not able to maintain his health and efficiency, and in fact, he may be starving. On the other hand, relative poverty merely indicates the large inequalities of income. Those who are in the lower income brackets receive less than those in the higher income groups. The people with lower incomes are relatively poor compared with those with higher incomes, even though they may be living above the minimum level of subsistence. It is absolute poverty with which we are concerned when we talk about the problem of poverty in India. Affluent countries such as the US have succeeded in removing absolute poverty from their people, but relative poverty still prevails because of the unequal distribution of income. The Planning Commission has now adopted an alternative definition of poverty provided by the Task Force on Projection of Minimum Needs and Effective Consumption Demand. Using the income poverty method, the task force has defined the poverty line as the midpoint of the monthly per capita expenditure class, having a daily calorie intake of 2,400 per person in rural areas and 2,100 in urban areas. The average calories requirement is estimated by taking into account the population composition by age, sex, and occupation categories, together with the corresponding recommended calorie norms by the Indian Council of Medical Research, that is ICMR. In rupees, the poverty line is a midpoint of the expenditure class in which the calorie needs are satisfied. On this basis, the cutoff point turns out to be rupees 228 and rupees 264 for rural and urban areas respectively at 1992-93 prices. For a household of 5 members, the poverty line has been fixed at an annual income of rupees 30,680 in rural areas and rupees 15,840 in urban areas. The percentage of poverty below the poverty line holds the headcount ratio in 2004 to 2005 and 2009 to 2010 is indicated in the table below. The poverty ratios for our rural population in the year 2004 to 5 was 41.8%, whereas in the year 2009 to 2010, it had dropped to 33.8%. For the urban population category, in 2004-2005, the poverty ratio was 25.7%, whereas in 2009-2010, it had dropped to 20.9%. When one considers the All India category, then the poverty ratio in 2004 to 5 was 37.2 and the ratio in 2009 to 10 was 29.8. Estimates of poverty. The Planning Commission has been estimating the incidence of poverty at the national and state level using the methodology contained in the report of the Expert Group on Estimation of Proportion and the Number of Poor, Lakadwala Committee, and applying it to consumption expenditure. Data from the large sample surveys on consumer expenditure is conducted by the NSSO at an interval of approximately 5 years. On this basis, comparable estimates of poverty are available at national and state level from 1973-74 to 1999-2000. According to the latest large sample survey data on consumer expenditure made available by the National Sample Survey Organization (NSSO) from its 55th round survey, July 1999 to June 2000, the poverty ratio on a 30-day recall basis is estimated at 27.09% in rural areas, 23.62% in urban areas, and 26.1% for the country as a whole. The incidence of poverty, expressed as a percentage of people living below the poverty line, has witnessed a steady decline from 55% in 1973-74 to 36% in 1993-94 and 26% in 1999-2000. Although the poverty ratio has declined, the number of poor has remained stable at around 320 million for a fairly long period of 2 decades, that is from 1973 to 1993, due to a countervailing growth in population. However, the latest estimates for 1999-2000 reveal a significantly reduced number of poor at about 260 million out of a total population of 997 million. Important recommendations and estimates of the Planning Commission Expert Group, Tendolkar Committee regarding poverty lines. Poverty estimates continue to be based on private household consumer expenditure of Indian households collected by the National Sample Survey Organization, that is NSSO. NSSO. There is a need to move away from anchoring the poverty lines to a calorie intake norm. For canvassing household expenditure on a recall basis, the NSSO has decided to shift to an MRP based estimate for all consumer consumption surveys in future. Therefore, there is a need to adopt the MRP based estimates of consumption expenditure as a basis for future poverty lines, as against the previous practice of using URP estimates. This change captures the household consumption expenditure of poor households on low frequency items of purchase more satisfactorily. MRP equivalence of urban poverty line basket PLB corresponding to 25.7% of urban headcount ratio as a new reference VLB to be provided to rural as well as urban population in all the states after suitable adjustments. State level poverty ratios. First, the big picture. The All India poverty ratio, that is the percentage below poverty line, has declined from 37.2 in 2004-2005 to 29.8 in 2009-2010, with a drop from 41.8 to 33.8 in rural area and a drop from 25.7% to 20.9% in urban India. A drop of 1% per year or marginally above or below is par for the course because of growth alone. The drop for rural India is much sharper than expected and needs to be probed further. At the state level, declines have been marked in HP, MP, Maharashtra, Orissa, Sikkim, Karnataka, and Uttarakhand. The declines have been marginal in Bihar, Chhattisgarh, and UP, and there have actually been increases in the poverty ratio in Assam, Meghalaya, Manipur, Mizoram, and Nagaland. At a broad level, non-Congress states perform better in poverty reduction than Congress states. And this should raise some questions about the efficacy of inclusive growth and delivery in implementation of anti-poverty measures. But consider the way this was reported in the media. When poverty estimates were done in 2004-2005, there was an established poverty line. And when the poverty estimates have been repeated in 2009 and 2010, and which was redone in 2004 to 2005, there is a different poverty line. The nominal poverty line seems to have declined, and logically, given inflation, that is actually impossible. The reason for the decline in the nominal poverty line is explained in the Planning Commission's press release. The explanation is that the methodology for arriving at the poverty line has changed. Earlier, inflation indices were used to move the poverty line up. Now, prices are actually determined from household consumption surveys. Given the sensitive nature of poverty estimates, one would have expected the Planning Commission to be much clearer about what is being done. There has been a subsequent clarification but the damage has been done. There is a completely separate issue about what this poverty line measures, since it is based on food and clothing and poverty, uh, which is a multi-dimensional context. And therefore, it raises a question as to why the Planning Commission should be computing it at all. The Planning Commission only needs to figure out the funds transferred to states based on anti-poverty measures. Discretionary transfers to the Planning Commission should be stopped, and such transfers should only happen through constitutionally mandated Finance Commission. That apart, decentralized identification of poverty is best left to the states. If this is done, the Planning Commission will avoid unnecessary embarrassment and controversy, whether it is before the Supreme Court or otherwise. The poverty reduction strategies are aimed to 1. Seek to attain the most rapid growth rate possible and sustain this growth rate over a decade or so as to increase incomes and the demand for labor. The 10th plan targets a GDP growth rate of 8%. 2. Ensure that the pattern of output is as labor intensive and capital saving as possible without distorting the normal comparative advantage of products. This will maximize the demand for labor and thus avoid increase in unemployment. 3. Ensure that the best attainable growth rates are achieved by the states and areas with the largest concentration of the poor. This will be helped by implementation of good governance actions as summarized above. 4. Provide additional central resources for states which undertake effective reform programs. 5. Continue to give top priority to primary education enrollment and attendance, especially of girls. 6. Similarly, emphasize primary health care and adequate nutrition, especially of children and women. 7. Implement area-based programs where the problems of poverty are the greatest or most intractable. And 8. Target vulnerable minorities which might not be able to benefit from other programs. Poverty and growth in the 11th plan. The draft approach paper of the 11th plan has emphasized a well-planned strategy of accelerated growth, incorporating a near doubling of the rate of growth of agriculture in order to reduce poverty. The plan paper also highlights that this can be achieved through a steady expansion in schemes which support incomes and welfare of the poorer sections. Examples of these schemes are the National Rural Employment Guarantee, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, the Midday Meal Scheme, the National Rural Health Mission, and Bharat Nirman, and so on. The plan also ensures a comprehensive strategy for tackling poverty, which requires development of an appropriate social safety net for containing elements like the Rural Employment Guarantee, the targeted public distribution system, provision of homestead sites, implementation of land reforms, the National Rural Health Mission, various types of crop and livestock insurance, old age pensions, etc. Chapter 5: Unemployment in India. Meaning of unemployment. By unemployment, economists mean a situation in which an individual is ready and willing to work at the prevailing rate of wages, but he doesn't get work. According to Professor pigeon, Pigon, a man is unemployed only when he is both without a job or not employed and also desires to be employed. Definition of unemployed. The usual status approach counts a person among the unemployed during a year if he or she has spent more time outside of the labor force than within it, and more time in seeking or being available for work than in the working state. The unemployment rate is understood as the ratio of number of persons unemployed to the number of persons in the labor force. That is, the total of employed and unemployed. In urban India, the unemployment rate, according to the usual status approach, considering both principal and subsidiary status together, was 4% among both males and females. In rural areas, the unemployment rate was lower. It was 2% for males and 1% for females. Measuring unemployment. Recognizing the inadequacy of the conventional measure, which covers only open unemployment, NSSO, that is the National Sample Survey Organization, uses two concepts to measure the unemployment in the country. The first one is called the usual principal status, UPS, or chronic unemployment. Using this concept, unemployment is measured in number of persons, that is, persons who remained unemployed for a major part of the year. A person is considered unemployed if he or she was not working but was either seeking or was available for work for a relatively longer time throughout the reference year. The estimates are given in terms of number of persons. This is also referred to as open unemployment. The second concept is called the current weekly status unemployment, CWS. Here the reference period is a week. A person is considered unemployed if he or she has not worked for even 1 hour during the week but was seeking or was available for work. The estimates are made in terms of the average number of persons unemployed per week. Reducing unemployment in the 11th Plan target. The 11th Plan draft approach paper pays special attention to the growth of employment through the following measures. 1. Changing employment patterns. The 11th Plan focuses on doubling the growth of agriculture GDP to 4% per year, which will improve employment conditions in agriculture by raising real wages and reducing the underemployed. In fact, if the economy does grow at 9% and the agricultural sector at 4% only, income disparity between agriculture versus non-agriculture will further increase unless the agricultural workforce reduces absolutely by around 10 million during the 11th Plan and non-agricultural employment increases at 5% per annum to absorb not only this shift but also all the new entrants into the labor force. B. Employment generating sectors. To increase the employment potential of economic growth, the 11th Plan will pay special attention to labor-intensive manufacturing sectors such as food processing industry, textiles, small and medium enterprises, tourism, and construction. Accelerated growth of manufacturing at 12% per year or higher will contribute enormously to additional job creation. C. National Rural Employment Guarantee Program, NREGP. The 11th plan will ensure that NREGP is adequately funded and effectively implemented. D. Self-employment programs. The 11th plan would seek to harmonize self-employment programs implemented by different ministries and implement an integrated self-employment program that cuts across ministerial boundaries. Productive capacity is to be created to generate enough jobs for all those able and willing to work. Not only is the productive capacity much below the needed level, it is also found to be increasing at a lower rate. This type of unemployment is not a temporary phenomenon in the sense that it will pass off on its own after a lapse of time. It is chronic and is the result of backwardness and low rate of economic development. Types of unemployment. 1. Disguised unemployment. When more people are engaged in a job than actually required, they are called disguised unemployment. If a part of labor is withdrawn and the total production remains unchanged, this withdrawn labor is called as disguised unemployed labor. 2. Seasonal unemployment. Generally, seasonal unemployment is confined to the agricultural sector because seasonality predominates in agriculture. The demand for agricultural labor increases at the time of sowing and harvesting, which provides employment for 6 to 8 months, and for the remaining period, most of the agricultural workers remain unemployed. 3. Cyclical unemployment. The main cause of cyclical unemployment is the slack in business activities, and this slack could be cyclical. This type of unemployment resulting from cyclical business activities is witnessed in developed countries. Technological unemployment. When introduction of new technology causes displacement of workers, it is called technological unemployment. Frictional unemployment. The temporary unemployment which exists during the period of the transfer of labor from one occupation to another is called frictional unemployment. It arises due to imperfections of the labor market. Imperfections in the labor market are reflected in the ignorance of labor about job opportunities. The provisional results of the 5th Economic Census 2005 released